The jogger's face drained of color as she read the name on the military ID card. What started as a petty neighborhood dispute over a public trail had just become something far more dangerous. The woman she'd been harassing, the one she'd called the police on for trespassing, wasn't just any ordinary wife and mother. She was a decorated Marine Corps officer whose credentials would soon turn this Karen's world upside down and expose secrets that would shatter more than just her entitled assumptions. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wooded trail. As Sarah Mitchell adjusted her running shoes, breathing in the crisp autumn air. At 34, she maintained the lean, athletic build that had served her well during her 12 years in the Marine Corps, though most neighbors in the affluent Riverside Heights subdivision had no idea about her military background. She preferred it that way. Civilian life meant blending in, being just another wife and mother in their picture-perfect community. The trail that wound through the woods behind their neighborhood had become her sanctuary. Every morning at 0600 hours, old habits died hard. She'd lace up her running shoes and disappear into the trees for an hour of solitude before her husband Jake left for his law practice and their 8-year-old daughter Emma woke up for school. Today felt different, though. As Sarah began her warm-up stretches against an old oak tree, she noticed a woman in expensive athleisure wear standing about 50 yards down the trail, arms crossed, staring directly at her. The woman appeared to be in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair despite the early hour and an expression that suggested she'd tasted something unpleasant. Sarah had seen her before. Margaret Whitmore, president of the Riverside Heights Homeowners Association and self-appointed guardian of neighborhood propriety. The woman who'd complained about Jake's motorcycle being too loud and had sent them a formal letter about Emma's chalk drawings on their own driveway being aesthetically displeasing. Ignoring the woman's hostile stare, Sarah started down the trail at an easy pace. She'd covered maybe a quarter mile when she heard rapid footsteps behind her. "Excuse me." Margaret's voice carried that particular tone of authority that certain suburban women wielded like a weapon. "Excuse me, you need to stop right there." Sarah slowed to a walk, then turned around. Margaret was slightly out of breath, her face flushed with exertion and indignation. "Yes?" Sarah kept her voice neutral, professional. Years of dealing with difficult personalities in the military had taught her the value of remaining calm under pressure. "You're trespassing," Margaret announced, as if she were delivering a verdict. "This trail is private property and you have no right to be here." Sarah blinked, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "Don't play dumb with me. This entire wooded area belongs to the Riverside Heights community. It's clearly marked as private property for residents only." Margaret's voice grew more strident. "And since you obviously don't live here, you need to leave immediately." The accusation was so absurd that Sarah almost laughed. "Mrs. Whitmore, I live at 1247 Maple Street. I've been running this trail for 3 years. That's impossible." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I know every resident in this neighborhood, and I've never seen you before in my life. You sent my husband and me a letter last month about his motorcycle. I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not falling for it." Margaret pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced in Afghanistan when situations went sideways without warning. "I really think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. You're trespassing, and I'm having you arrested." Margaret was already dialing. "Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser in Riverside Heights. She's on private property and refusing to leave." The next few minutes passed in a surreal blur. Margaret stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, providing an increasingly dramatic account of events while Sarah stood there, feeling like she'd stepped into some alternate reality. Other early morning joggers and dog walkers began gathering at a safe distance, drawn by the commotion. "She's becoming aggressive," Margaret told the dispatcher, even though Sarah hadn't moved or raised her voice. "I feel threatened. Please send officers immediately." Sarah's military training kicked in. "Document everything. Stay calm. Don't escalate." She pulled out her own phone and began recording. "What are you doing?" Margaret demanded. "Recording this interaction for my own protection." "You can't do that. This is harassment." Actually, I can. We are in a public space and you're the one who called the police. Margaret's face flushed deeper red. Put that phone away right now or I'll add harassment to the charges. What charges? I haven't committed any crimes. Trespassing. Criminal. Trespassing. 2 police cruisers arrived within minutes, their red and blue lights strobing through the trees. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she watched 4 officers approach. This was exactly the kind of situation that could spiral out of control quickly. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes, approached Margaret first. You called about a trespasser? Yes, officer. Margaret squinted at his name tag. Officer Rodriguez. This woman is on private property and refuses to leave. She's been aggressive and threatening, and now she's harassing me with her phone. Officer Rodriguez looked at Sarah, who was still recording. I'm going to need you to put the phone away and step over here. Sarah complied, slipping the phone into her pocket. Officer, I live in this neighborhood. I run this trail every morning. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. She's lying, Margaret interjected. I know every resident here, and I've never seen her before. Let me see some ID, Rodriguez said to Sarah. Sarah reached for a wallet, but Margaret quickly added, don't believe whatever fake ID she shows you. She's probably not even from around here. Rodriguez held up a hand. Please let me handle this. He took Sarah's driver's license and studied it carefully. 1247 Maple Street, that's in Riverside Heights. That's impossible, Margaret insisted. I tell you, I know everyone in this neighborhood. Well, according to this ID, she's been living at that address for 3 years. Rodriguez handed the license back to Sarah. Are you the homeowner? Or a renter? Homeowner. My husband and I bought the house in 2021. She's lying. Margaret's voice was getting shrill. Officer, I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. I have records of every resident. She is not one of them. Rodriguez looked between the 2 women, clearly trying to figure out how to handle the situation. He said to Margaret, do you have any evidence that this trail is private property? Of course it's private property. The whole neighborhood is private. But is this specific trail marked as private property? Margaret faltered for a moment. It doesn't need to be marked. Everyone knows it's private. Sarah spoke up quietly. Officer, I believe this is actually a county trail that runs through several neighborhoods. It connects to the main park system about 2 miles east. She's making that up. Margaret snapped. Rodriguez was beginning to look annoyed. I'm going to need you to lower your voice. And you, he said to Sarah, how long have you been running this trail? Every morning for 3 years, sir. Usually around 6 a.m. And you've never had any problems before? No, sir. I've seen Mrs. Whitmore around the neighborhood, but we've never spoken directly until today. Margaret's face was now a dangerous shade of red. Officer, I demand you arrest this woman immediately. She's trespassing, she's lying about where she lives, and she's been aggressive and threatening. Rodriguez looked at Sarah again. Have you been aggressive or threatening toward this woman? No, sir. I've been recording the interaction, but I haven't raised my voice or made any threats. I want to see that recording, Margaret demanded. That's her personal property, Rodriguez said. She's not required to share it with you. This is ridiculous. I'm a pillar of this community. I volunteer at the library, I organize the neighborhood watch, I've been HOA president for 6 years. Margaret was practically vibrating with indignation. And you're taking the word of some random woman over mine. She's not a random woman. She's provided valid ID showing she lives in this neighborhood. Then why have I never seen her before? Sarah finally spoke up. Maybe because I'm usually gone by 7 a.m. and you don't strike me as an early riser. Margaret whirled on her. How dare you? Officer, did you hear that? She's being smart-mouthed and disrespectful. That wasn't disrespectful, Rodriguez said wearily. That was just answering your question. I want to speak to your supervisor. My supervisor is busy with actual crimes. The other officers had been standing back, but now one of them, a younger woman with short dark hair, approached Rodriguez. Bob, we need to wrap this up. We just got a call about a break-in on the north side. Rodriguez nodded, then turned back. To Margaret. I'm not seeing any evidence of trespassing here. This woman has valid ID showing she lives in the neighborhood, and without clear posted signs indicating this trail is private property, I can't make an arrest. This is outrageous. Margaret's voice cracked. I'm calling the mayor. I'm calling the police chief. This is discrimination. You. Margaret Whitmore sat in her pristine home office, surrounded by color-coded HOA files and awards from various civic organizations. The mahogany desk that had belonged to her late father gleamed under the afternoon light streaming through plantation. Shudders. She'd been making phone calls for 3 hours, and her perfectly applied makeup was beginning to show stress cracks. What do you mean you can't find anything? She snapped into her phone, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I'm paying you good money for a comprehensive background check. The voice on the other end belonged to Rick Torino, a private investigator. She'd used before to dig up dirt on troublesome neighbors. Usually, Rick could find something: unpaid parking tickets, old arrest records, financial problems. Everyone had skeletons. Margaret, I'm telling you, these people are clean. Jake Mitchell is a partner at Henderson, Cross and Associates. Been practicing law for 15 years, no disciplinary actions, no complaints. Solid credit, no criminal history. The guy's a Boy Scout. What about the wife? That's where it gets interesting. Sarah Mitchell, maiden name Carson. Born in Denver, but after high school, her trail goes cold for about 12 years. Then she pops up in San Diego 3 years ago when they bought the house. Margaret's pulse quickened. What do you mean her trail goes cold? I mean there's nothing. No employment records, no address history, no credit activity. It's like she disappeared for over a decade. That's impossible. Nobody just disappears for 12 years. Actually, it's not that uncommon. Usually means military service, witness protection, or overseas work. Given her age and the time frame, I'd guess military. Margaret's mind raced. Military. That could explain the woman's calm demeanor during the confrontation, the way she'd stood perfectly still while recording the early morning routine. But it also presented opportunities. Can you find out which branch? What kind of discharge? I'm working on it, but military records are tough to crack. Might take a few days. I don't have a few days. I need leverage now. Margaret, what exactly are you planning to do with this information? She hung up without answering. Rick was getting soft, asking too many questions. She needed someone with fewer scruples and better connections. Margaret pulled up a different contact on her phone, Tommy Briggs, a former police officer who'd been quietly forced into early retirement after some questionable arrests. Tommy did security work now, mostly for wealthy clients who needed problems to disappear. Tommy, it's Margaret Whitmore. I need a favor. What kind of favor? Tommy's voice was gravelly from years of smoking. I need information on a neighbor. Military background, possibly problematic discharge. There's a bonus if you can find something that would get her arrested. How much of a bonus? $5,000 if you can find criminal activity. $10,000 if you can manufacture it. There was a pause. Margaret, you know I can't manufacture, I know you can't. But hypothetically, if someone were to find drug paraphernalia in this person's trash, or if someone were to report suspicious activity at their address, well, that would be very helpful to the community. Another pause. Text me the address. As Margaret ended the call, she felt a familiar surge of power. She'd been running Riverside Heights for 6 years, and she'd never met a problem she couldn't solve. The key was finding the right pressure point and applying steady force until people broke. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to the HOA board members. Subject: security concerns, immediate action required. Fellow board members, I'm writing to inform you of a serious security incident that occurred this morning involving a potential trespasser on our private trails. After investigation, I've discovered that the individual in question has a suspicious background with potential ties to criminal activity. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening to discuss enhanced security measures and the possibility of restricting trail access to verified residents only. Please review the attached incident report and come prepared to discuss immediate action. Regards, Margaret Whitmore, HOA president. She'd barely hit send when her doorbell rang. Margaret smoothed her hair and checked her appearance in the hallway mirror before opening the door. Jake Mitchell stood on her porch, still wearing his charcoal suit from the law office. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of easy confidence that successful attorneys cultivated. Under different circumstances, Margaret might have found him attractive. Mrs. Whitmore. I'm Jake Mitchell. I believe you know my wife, Sarah. Margaret's smile was arctic. Mr. Mitchell. How can I help you? I understand there was some kind of misunderstanding this morning. I was hoping we could clear it up. There was no misunderstanding. Your wife was trespassing on private property. Jake's expression remained pleasant, but Margaret caught a flicker of something harder in his eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, we've lived here for 3 years. Sarah runs that trail every morning. She's never had any problems before. Well, she's having problems now. I see. Jake shifted slightly and Margaret noticed he was holding a manila folder. Mrs. Whitmore, I practice civil rights law. I specialize in cases involving discrimination and harassment. I've handled several cases against homeowners associations. The threat was politely delivered, but it was definitely a threat. Margaret's smile sharpened. Is that supposed to intimidate me, Mr. Mitchell? Not at all. I'm just trying to understand why my wife was accused of trespassing in her own neighborhood. Because I don't know her. I've been HOA president for 6 years and I know every resident in this community. That's interesting, because according to our HOA dues payment records, you've been cashing our checks for 3 years. Margaret felt a cold stab of uncertainty. That's handled by the management company. Actually, no. I looked into it this afternoon. You personally sign all the deposit slips. Jake opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. Here's a copy of every check we've written to the HOA, and here's a copy of the deposit records with your signature. Margaret's mouth went dry. She'd been so focused on the woman's face that she'd never bothered to connect it to the names on the payment records. This doesn't change anything, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Mrs. Whitmore, I think we both know this was a mistake. The question is whether we can resolve it quietly or whether it needs to become a legal matter. Ah. You threatening me? I'm offering you a way out. My wife was publicly humiliated and falsely accused of criminal activity. She was nearly arrested because of your actions. We could file a complaint with the police for filing a false report. We could sue the HOA for harassment and discrimination. Or we could chalk this up to a misunderstanding and move on. Margaret's mind raced. She'd made a tactical error, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Your wife was aggressive and threatening. I have witnesses. Actually, she was recording the entire interaction. Would you like me to review that recording with you? The confidence in Jake's voice suggested he'd already seen the recording. Margaret realized she was trapped, but she'd been cornered before and always found a way out. Fine. It was a misunderstanding. But I want to know why I've never seen your wife before. Because she's usually finished with her run before most people are awake. Sarah's an early riser. Military. Jake paused and Margaret caught it. Why do you ask? Just curious. The early morning routine, the way she handled the confrontation, seemed like someone with training. Sarah's background is her own business. Of course. But as HOA president, I have a responsibility to know who's living in our community. You have a responsibility to collect dues and maintain common areas. You don't have a responsibility to interrogate residents about their personal lives. Margaret smiled tightly. We'll see about that. Jake studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to give you some free legal advice. Drop this. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you're going to accomplish, it's not worth the consequences. Is that a threat? It's a warning. My wife doesn't like conflict, but she doesn't back down from it either. If you push this, you might not like what you find. After Jake left, Margaret stood in her doorway, watching him walk down the street. The lawyer was smooth, she'd give him that. But he'd also revealed something important. He was worried about his wife's background being exposed. Which meant there was definitely something to expose. Margaret went back to her office and called Tommy Briggs again. I need that information. Tonight, she said without preamble. Margaret, these things take time, I'll double the fee. 20,000 if you can find something actionable. 20,000. Tommy's voice perked up. What's this woman done to you? She made me look like a fool. Nobody does that in my neighborhood. All right, I'll make some calls. But Margaret, if this woman is military, you might want to be careful. Some of these vets come back pretty messed up. I'm not afraid of some housewife with PTSD. Yeah, well, sometimes the housewives are the ones you should be afraid of. Margaret hung up and began planning her next move. She'd call an emergency HOA meeting, review the community bylaws, maybe implement some new security measures. If Sarah Mitchell wanted to live in Riverside Heights, she'd have to prove she belonged there. What Margaret didn't know was that across town, Sarah Mitchell was having her own conversation. Jack. Riverside Heights Community Center buzzed with an unusual level of activity for a Thursday evening. Margaret had called the emergency HOA meeting for 7 p.m., and by 6:30, the small auditorium was packed with more residents than had attended the last 5 regular meetings combined. Sarah arrived at exactly 1900 hours, dressed in a crisp navy blazer and khaki slacks, civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. Jake walked beside her, carrying a leather briefcase, while 8-year-old Emma stayed home with her babysitter, blissfully unaware that her mother's carefully constructed civilian life was about to be dissected in public. The room fell silent. As they entered, Sarah could feel dozens of eyes tracking her movement as she and Jake took seats in the middle section, close enough to hear everything, far enough back to maintain tactical awareness of the exits. Margaret stood at the podium, wearing a burgundy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. She'd arranged the 5-member HOA board behind her like a tribunal, and had even hired a professional stenographer to record the proceedings. Good evening, everyone, Margaret began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been successfully challenged. Thank you for attending this emergency meeting. I know many of you are wondering why we are here tonight. She paused for effect, letting her gaze sweep across the room before landing on Sarah. We are here because the safety and security of our community has been threatened. We are here because someone has been using our private facilities under false pretenses. And we are here because, as your elected representatives, we have a duty to protect this neighborhood from potential dangers. Sarah felt Jake tense beside her, but she remained perfectly still, her face neutral. She'd sat through countless briefings where superior officers had made sweeping accusations. The key was never to react until you knew exactly what you were dealing with. 3 days ago, Margaret continued, I encountered an individual on our private trail system who claimed to be a resident of this community. When I asked for identification, this person became aggressive and hostile. When I called the police, this person began recording me without consent. A murmur ran through the crowd. Recording someone without consent wasn't illegal in California. But Margaret made it sound criminal. Upon further investigation, I discovered that this individual has a highly questionable background. Military service that ended under mysterious circumstances. 12 years of missing employment records. And most disturbing of all, possible connections to classified government operations. Sarah's blood ran cold. Operation Sandstorm. Margaret had found something. Now, I'm not saying this person is dangerous, Margaret continued, her tone suggesting exactly the opposite. But I am saying that we have a right to know who we are living next to. We have a right to feel safe in our own community. Margaret clicked a remote, and a projector screen dropped down behind her. The first slide showed a satellite image of Riverside Heights with the trail system highlighted in red. This is our private trail system, funded by HOA dues and maintained by community volunteers. It's not a public park. It's not a county trail. It's our property, for our residents. The next slide showed a blown-up copy of Sarah's driver's license photo. This is Sarah Mitchell, who claims to live at 1247 Maple Street. But how many of you have actually seen her before this week? A few hands went up tentatively. Margaret had clearly coached some residents beforehand. Exactly. Despite living here for supposedly 3 years, Mrs. Mitchell has been virtually invisible. No participation in community events. No volunteer work. No social interaction with neighbors. Why? What is she hiding? The next slide made Sarah's heart stop. It was a military photograph, her in dress uniform, receiving her Bronze Star. The image was grainy, clearly pulled from some database it shouldn't have been accessible from. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Captain Sarah Carson, United States Marine Corps. Multiple tours in Afghanistan. Decorated for combat operations. And this is where it gets interesting. Margaret clicked to the next slide, which showed a partially redacted military document. According to my sources, Captain Carson left the Marines under circumstances that remain classified. Her final deployment involved something called Operation Sandstorm, details of which are still sealed by the Department of Defense. The room erupted in whispers. Sarah could feel the weight of every stare, could practically hear the wheels turning. In her neighbors' minds. Marine. Combat veteran. Classified operations. In the post-9/11 world, that combination made people nervous. Now, I'm not suggesting that Mrs. Mitchell, or should I say, Captain Carson, is a threat to our community. But I am suggesting that we have a right to know what kind of person we are living next to. We have a right to know if someone in our neighborhood has been involved in activities that might make us a target. Margaret paused, letting the implications sink in. Which is why I'm proposing Emergency Resolution 2025-003, Enhanced Security Verification. Any resident whose background cannot be fully verified through standard channels will be restricted from using community facilities until a comprehensive security review can be completed. The room fell silent. Margaret was essentially proposing to ban Sarah from the trails, the community center, the pool, anywhere that wasn't her own property. This isn't about discrimination, Margaret continued. This is about transparency. This is about safety. This is about protecting our property values and our quality of life. Board member Patricia Hernandez raised her hand. Margaret, don't you think this is a bit extreme? Mrs. Mitchell has been a model resident. She pays her dues, follows the rules. Pat, how do you know she's been a model resident if you've never seen her before this week? Margaret's voice carried a sharp edge. How do you know she follows the rules if we don't know what rules she's operating under? Another board member, elderly Robert Chen, spoke up. Mrs. Whitmore, are you suggesting that military service is somehow disqualifying for residency? Of course not, Bob. But I am suggesting that classified military operations that we can't verify might be disqualifying. We have children in this neighborhood. We have elderly residents. We have a right to know if someone's past might put us at risk. Sarah had heard enough. She stood up, her movement crisp and controlled, and every eye in the room turned to her. Mrs. Whitmore, may I respond to your allegations? Margaret's smile was razor-thin. Mrs. Mitchell, this is a board meeting. Residents will have an opportunity to speak during the comment period. Actually, Jake interjected, standing beside his wife. According to HOA bylaws, any resident who is the subject of a proposed resolution has the right to address the board before a vote is taken. Margaret's jaw tightened. She'd clearly hoped to railroad the vote through before Sarah could defend herself. Very well. Mrs. Mitchell, you have 5 minutes. Sarah walked to the podium, her spine straight, her pace measured. She'd addressed rooms full of hostile bureaucrats and skeptical commanding officers. A suburban HOA meeting should have been easy. But this wasn't about military strategy or operational necessity. This was about her daughter's right to grow up in a safe neighborhood. This was about her family's right to exist without persecution. Good evening, Sarah began, her voice carrying easily to the back of the room. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I live at 1247 Maple Street with my husband Jake and our 8-year-old daughter Emma. I've been a resident of this community for 3 years, and I've been running the trail system every morning for the same period. She paused, making eye contact with various residents throughout the room. Mrs. Whitmore is correct about several things. I am a former Marine Corps officer. I did serve 3 tours in Afghanistan. I did receive a Bronze Star, along with a Purple Heart and several other decorations. And yes, some of my military service involved classified operations. The room was dead silent. What Mrs. Whitmore failed to mention is that my military service ended with an honorable discharge and full benefits. What she failed to mention is that I was medically retired after being wounded by an IED while leading a convoy rescue mission. What she failed to mention is that Operation Sandstorm was classified not because it was controversial, but because it saved the lives of 47 Afghan civilians and 3 captured American servicemen. Sarah's voice never wavered, but there was steel underneath the calm tone. Mrs. Whitmore also failed to mention that the reason you haven't seen me at community events is because I've been dealing with physical therapy for injuries sustained in service to this country. The reason I run at 6 a.m. is because that's when my pain levels are manageable. The reason I've been invisible is because I've been recovering from wounds and protecting the freedoms that allow Mrs. Whitmore to stand up here and make these accusations. The mood in the room was shifting. Sarah could feel it, the whispers were becoming more supportive, the hostile stares were turning sympathetic. But let me be very clear about something, Sarah continued, her voice taking on the command tone that had once directed Marines in combat. I don't owe anyone in this room an explanation of my military service. I don't owe anyone access to my medical records or my classified files. I don't owe anyone proof that I deserve to live in the neighborhood. I've been paying. Sarah was loading the dishwasher after breakfast when the doorbell rang at exactly 9:15 a.m. Through the kitchen window, she could see a white sedan in her driveway and 2 people in business attire standing on her porch. Her stomach dropped. Emma, go upstairs and play in your room for a bit, okay, sweetheart? But Mom, I'm watching cartoons now, baby girl. Sarah's voice carried a tone that Emma had learned not to question. Her daughter scampered upstairs, sensing the sudden tension in the house. Sarah opened the door to find a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes, accompanied by a younger man carrying a clipboard and camera bag. Both wore ID badges hanging from lanyards. Mrs. Mitchell. I'm Linda Santos from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, David Kim. We need to speak with you about your daughter. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Stay calm. Document everything. Don't provide information beyond what's legally required. May I see your identification, please? Linda Santos handed over her official CPS badge. David Kim did the same. Both were legitimate. What is this regarding? Sarah asked. Though she already knew. We received a report concerning the welfare of Emma Mitchell. May we come in? What kind of report? Mrs. Mitchell would prefer to discuss this inside. We have some questions about your background and your fitness as a parent. Sarah felt the familiar cold fury building in her chest, the same feeling she'd had when Taliban fighters used human shields. Someone was attacking her child and they were using bureaucracy as their weapon. I'd like to call my attorney before we proceed. Mrs. Mitchell, you're not under arrest. We are just here to conduct a welfare check on your daughter. You can certainly call your attorney, but that might send the wrong message about your willingness to cooperate. The implied threat was clear: resist and look guilty, or comply and hope for the best. Sarah had seen this tactic used by hostile interrogators. Give me one moment. Sarah stepped back into the house and quickly texted Jake, "CPS here. Emergency. Come home now." Then she opened the door wider. "Please come in. My husband is on his way." Linda Santos and David Kim entered the living room, and Sarah watched them take note of everything: the family photos on the mantel, Emma's toys scattered around, the general cleanliness and organization of the house. "Mrs. Mitchell, we received a report that suggested your daughter might be at risk due to your mental health status. Specifically, concerns about PTSD and potential violent behavior related to your military service." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she was calculating distances to exits, threat levels, and response options. Margaret Whitmore had just declared war on her family. "Who made this report?" "That information is confidential. But we need to ask you some questions about your military service and any treatment you may have received for combat-related trauma." "Miss Santos, I was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps with full benefits. I've never been diagnosed with any condition that would impair my ability to parent my daughter." "But you did serve in combat." "Yes." "And you were wounded in action." "Yes." "Have you ever received treatment for PTSD, anxiety, depression, or any other mental health condition?" Sarah paused. She had received counseling after her medical retirement, standard protocol for wounded veterans. Nothing that would disqualify her as a parent, but in the wrong hands, it could be twisted. "I received routine counseling as part of my medical retirement process. All veterans go through psychological evaluation when transitioning to civilian life." David Kim was taking notes and occasionally snapping photos of the room. "Mrs. Mitchell, has your daughter ever witnessed you having nightmares, flashbacks, or violent episodes?" "No." "Has she ever asked questions about your military service that suggested she was afraid of you?" "No." "Have you ever lost your temper with your daughter in a way that might be considered excessive?" Sarah felt her jaw clench. "No." The front door opened and Jake burst in, still wearing his suit from the office. "Sarah, what's..." He stopped when he saw the CPS workers. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Linda Santos from Child Protective Services. We're conducting a welfare check on your daughter." Jake immediately shifted into lawyer mode. "Based on what complaint?" "An anonymous report expressing concerns about your wife's mental health and its potential impact on your child's safety." "I see. And what evidence do you have to support these concerns?" "Mr. Mitchell, we are just beginning our investigation. We'd like to interview your daughter and conduct a brief inspection of the home." "Not without a warrant." Linda Santos sighed. "Mr. Mitchell, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. We can conduct a voluntary interview today, or we can come back with a court order and make this much more formal and intrusive." Jake looked at Sarah, who gave him a small nod. They both knew that refusing to cooperate would only make things worse. "Emma." Sarah called upstairs. "Can you come down here for a minute?" Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her 8-year-old face curious but cautious. She was a smart kid who could read the tension in a room. "Emma, these people are from a government office and they'd like to ask you a few questions." "Is that okay?" Emma came downstairs slowly, moving closer to her mother. "What kind of questions?" Linda Santos knelt down to Emma's eye level, her voice shifting to the overly gentle tone adults used with children they were trying to manipulate. "Hi. Emma, I'm Linda. We just want to make sure you're happy and safe at home. Can you tell me about living with your mom and dad?" "They are the best parents ever," Emma said without hesitation. "That's wonderful. Emma, does your mom ever get angry or scared in ways that frighten you?" Emma looked confused. "Mom doesn't get scared of anything. She's a Marine." "Yes, we heard about that. Does she ever talk about the war or have bad dreams that wake you up?" "Sometimes she has dreams, but she says everyone has dreams. And she only talks about the war when I ask questions." "What kind of questions do you ask?" "Like if she ever met any princesses in Afghanistan, or if she rode camels, or if she brought me back any pretty rocks." Sarah felt her heart break a little. In Emma's innocent mind, her mother's war was just another adventure, like a fairy tale. Emma, has your mom ever hurt you or yelled at you in a way that scared you? No. Mom never hurts anybody. She says Marines protect people, they don't hurt them. Has she ever seemed different? Like maybe she wasn't really there with you? Emma thought about this seriously. Sometimes when we are watching the news and there's stuff about soldiers, she gets quiet. But Dad says that's because she misses her friends. David Kim spoke up. Emma, if you could change anything about your mom, what would it be? Emma considered this with the gravity only children could bring to hypothetical questions. I wish she could teach me to do push-ups like her. She can do 50 in a row. Linda Santos tried a different approach. Emma, are there any guns in your house? Jake started to object, but Sarah touched his arm. Yes, Emma, you can answer that. Mom has a gun safe in her closet. She showed me how it works and told me never to touch it. She says guns are tools that require training and respect. Are you afraid of the guns? No. Mom says being afraid of something you understand is silly. She taught me about gun safety just like she taught me about kitchen knives and power tools. Linda Santos was clearly not getting the answers she'd hoped for. She stood up and looked around the living room again. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell would like to conduct a brief inspection of the home, particularly your daughter's room and any areas where weapons might be stored. Fine, Sarah said. But I'm recording this entire interaction for our protection. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Linda Santos looked annoyed but didn't object. The inspection took 20 minutes. Emma's room was clean, decorated with art projects and filled with age-appropriate toys. The gun safe was properly secured and locked. The house showed no signs of neglect, abuse, or instability. Mrs. Mitchell, Linda Santos said as they prepared to leave, we may need to follow up with additional interviews. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that you continue any counseling or therapy you've been receiving. I'm not currently receiving any treatment because I don't require any treatment. Sometimes people with combat trauma don't realize they need help. Sarah felt her patience finally snap. Miss Santos, I've been evaluated by military psychologists, VA counselors, and civilian therapists. I've been cleared for civilian life, cleared for gun ownership, and cleared for parenting. I have a spotless record as both a Marine and a mother. If someone has convinced you otherwise, I suggest you consider their motives. After the CPS workers left, Sarah sat on her couch with Emma curled up beside her, Jake pacing the living room like a caged tiger. They'll file their report as unfounded, Jake said. Emma's testimony was perfect, the house is clean, and they found no evidence of any problems. This isn't over, Sarah said quietly. Margaret Whitmore just escalated this beyond neighborhood politics. She brought my daughter into it. Sarah, we handled it. CPS will close the case and, Jake, you don't understand. In Afghanistan, when someone threatened civilians, especially children, the rules of engagement changed. This isn't about HOA disputes anymore. What are you saying? Sarah looked down at Emma, who was contentedly drawing in her coloring book, completely unaware that her safety had. At 0500 hours, Sarah Mitchell stood in her kitchen, dressed in full combat gear she hadn't worn since Afghanistan. Black tactical pants, lightweight body armor, combat boots, and a utility belt equipped with zip ties, a tactical flashlight, and a service weapon. She looked like she was preparing for a raid, which, in a way, she was. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and Margaret Whitmore wasn't a Taliban insurgent. This was suburbia, and Sarah was about to demonstrate the difference between someone who played games and someone who ended them. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Jake, who'd seen the local news report about unusual police activity in Riverside Heights. Sarah had turned off her phone after sending him a single text, Emma is safe. I'm finishing this. Trust me. The doorbell rang at exactly 0530. Sarah opened it to find Master Sergeant Carter, also dressed in tactical gear, carrying a large duffel bag. Morning, Captain. Ready to execute Operation Accountability. Master Sergeant, I told you this was a solo mission. With respect, no Marine operates alone. Besides, you're going to need backup for what we are about to do. Carter shouldered past her into the house, setting the duffel bag on the kitchen table. He unzipped it to reveal an array of electronic equipment, cameras, recording devices, signal detectors, and what looked like professional surveillance gear. Where did you get all this? I work private security for some very paranoid rich people. They like to keep tabs on their enemies. Sarah studied the equipment. Master Sergeant, we're not going to break any laws. No, we're not. But we are going to make sure Margaret Whitmore breaks a few more. At 0600, Sarah and Carter took positions in the woods behind Margaret's house. The colonial mansion sat on a meticulously maintained 2-acre lot, complete with a swimming pool, guest house, and 3-car garage filled with luxury vehicles. Target acquired, Carter whispered into his radio headset. Tango 1 is mobile in the kitchen, appears to be making coffee. Sarah adjusted her scope, though the rifle she carried was loaded with tranquilizer darts, a precaution Carter had insisted on. Through the kitchen window, she could see Margaret in an expensive silk robe, talking animatedly on her phone. Can you get audio? Sarah asked. Carter tapped his headset. Crystal clear. She's talking to someone named Tommy about Phase 3. Something about planting evidence in your garage. Sarah felt her jaw clench. Margaret was planning to frame her. Master Sergeant, initiate recording protocol Alpha. Copy that. Carter activated a series of recording devices positioned around Margaret's property. Everything Margaret said or did for the next 6 hours would be documented from multiple angles. At 0630, a white van pulled into Margaret's driveway. The man who got out was heavyset, balding, and moved with the awkward gait of someone trying to look casual while carrying illegal equipment. That's gotta be Tommy Briggs, Carter whispered. The dirty ex-cop she's been using. Margaret met Tommy at her front door, and their conversation was immediately picked up by the recording equipment. Did you bring the package? Margaret's voice came through Carter's headset clearly. Got it right here. Military-grade explosives, just like you asked for. This make it look like your Marine neighbor has been stockpiling dangerous materials. Perfect. Plant it in their garage, then call it in anonymously. I want her arrested. For terrorism charges. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Margaret wasn't just trying to harass her anymore, she was trying to have her imprisoned as a terrorist. Jesus Christ, Carter whispered. She's completely lost it. Master Sergeant, you getting all this? Every word. We've got her on conspiracy, filing false reports, and now attempted framing with explosive materials. At 0700, Tommy Briggs drove toward Sarah's house with a package that would have destroyed her life. What he didn't know was that Sarah and Carter had anticipated this move. Bravo team, execute intercept, Sarah said into a radio. 3 blocks from Sarah's house, Tommy's van was surrounded by police cruisers. Detective Rodriguez, the same officer who'd responded to the original trespassing call, personally arrested Tommy with the explosive materials still in his possession. Margaret's phone rang immediately. What do you mean you've been arrested? Margaret's voice carried clearly through the surveillance equipment. How is that possible? I don't know. They were waiting for me. It's like they knew I was coming. Did you tell them anything? I want a lawyer. The call ended and Margaret stood in her kitchen, her face pale with shock. She just realized that her carefully planned operation had been compromised. At 0730, Sarah and Carter repositioned to Margaret's front yard. Sarah walked up to the front door in full tactical gear and rang the doorbell. Margaret opened the door and immediately went white as a sheet. Hello, Mrs. Whitmore. I think we need to talk. Oh. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm calling the police. Go ahead. Detective Rodriguez is expecting your call. Margaret fumbled for her phone, but her hands were shaking too badly to dial. Mrs. Whitmore, your associate Tommy Briggs was just arrested with military-grade explosives that he was planning to plant in my garage. Explosives that you provided. Would you like to hear the recording of your conversation with him? Carter. stepped into view, holding a digital audio recorder. Margaret's voice played clearly, planted in their garage, then called in anonymously. "I want her arrested for terrorism charges." Margaret collapsed into a chair, her face grey with shock. "You see, Mrs. Whitmore, you made a fundamental mistake. You thought you were fighting a suburban housewife. But I'm not a housewife, I'm a United States Marine. And when you threatened my child, you activated protocols that you couldn't possibly understand." Sarah stepped into Margaret's house uninvited, her presence filling the space like a force of nature. "For the past week, you've been under complete surveillance. Every phone call, every meeting, every illegal activity has been recorded and documented. We have you on conspiracy, filing false police reports, filing false CPS reports, hiring unlicensed private investigators, and conspiracy to commit terrorism." Margaret tried to speak, but only a croak came out. "But here's what's really going to destroy you," Sarah continued. "You used government agencies as weapons against a veteran and her family. You filed false reports with Child Protective Services. You tried to frame an honorably discharged Marine as a terrorist." Sarah leaned down until she was eye level with Margaret. "Do you know what happens to people who abuse the system to attack veterans? Do you know how the media treats people who weaponize CPS against military families? Do you know what happens to your perfect little life when everyone finds out you tried to plant explosives in a neighborhood with children?" Margaret finally found her voice. "You can't prove anything." Carter stepped forward and placed a tablet on the coffee table. The screen showed a grid of video feeds from around Margaret's property, audio recordings, and a complete timeline of the past week's activities. "Actually, we can prove everything. We have enough evidence to put you and your associates away for 20 to life." Sarah sat down across from Margaret, her voice becoming almost conversational. "But here's the thing, Mrs. Whitmore. I don't want to destroy you. I just want you to disappear." "What?" "I want you to resign from the HOA, sell your house, and move away from my family. I want you to drop every false complaint you filed. I want you to publicly apologize for the harassment. And I want you to never, ever threaten another veteran or their family again." Margaret's eyes darted between Sarah and Carter. "And if I don't?" Sarah smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Margaret had ever seen. "Then I release all of this evidence to the FBI, the media, and every veterans organization in the country. I let them know that Margaret Whitmore of Riverside Heights tried to frame a decorated Marine as a terrorist. I let them know that you weaponized Child Protective Services against a military family. I let them know that you hired criminals to plant explosives in a neighborhood full of children." Sarah leaned back, perfectly calm. "How long do you think it would take for your life to become completely unlivable? How long before every news station in California is parked outside your house? How long before the FBI raids your property? How long before you become the most hated person in America?" Margaret was crying now, the full weight of her situation finally sinking in. "Oh, I never meant for it to go this far. You made me look foolish, and you tried to destroy my family because your ego was bruised," Sarah said flatly. "You filed false reports, hired criminals, and attempted to frame me for terrorism because I went for a run in my own neighborhood." Sarah stood up, towering over the broken woman. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Detective Rodriguez and confess to filing false reports. You're going to resign from the HOA effective immediately. You're going to put your house on the market today. And you're going to disappear from my life forever. And if I do all that, then this evidence stays sealed and you get to rebuild your life somewhere else. Somewhere far away from my family." Margaret nodded frantically. "Yes, okay, I'll do whatever you want." "Good. You have 24 hours to start the process. Master Sergeant Carter will be monitoring your communications to make sure you comply." As Sarah and Carter prepared to leave, Margaret Cale